Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing? Right-wing proponent Nigel Farage, who was known for a single issue, which was Brexit, has now started to veer into different directions and has, for some reason, started to comment on Muslims in Britain. Let's take a look at some of the comments that he's made recently and come back and respond in kind.
We have a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, in fact, loathe much of what we stand for. So what do you do?
Who are we talking about there?
Oh, I think we see them on the streets of London every Saturday.
What do they look like? Oh, we're talking about...
What do they look like?
Are we talking about Muslims here?
We are. And I'm afraid I found some of the recent surveys saying that 46% of British Muslims support Hamas, support a terrorist organisation that is prescribed in this country. So we've been, and what's interesting is that this Prime Minister is building up far more of that population than anybody before in history.
Now, many things have been said by different people, proponents of media, and I've been following some of the comments of some right-wing people who have actually said, quote unquote, well, tell us what he said that is wrong. I mean, he's saying that
it's not just right-leaning people that contacted you that said, like, look at this. He said, like, so many people contacted me that said, what is he saying he's wrong? That is wrong. It's Muslims from the UK also will agree with this. Yeah, proudly so. Let's just go listen to Daniel Hagaju and so many other Muslims. Like, yeah, we do not accept UK values. And proudly so. Like, of course, Islamic values come before like your man-made laws. And again, I will show you that there's this other guy named Mohammed Hijab who agrees with that. I will show you that.
Many things have been said by different people, proponents of media, and I've been following some of the comments of some right-wing people who have actually said, quote unquote, well, tell us what he said that is wrong. I mean, he's saying that Muslims in this country, who, let's say, constitute about 7% of the country's population, that Muslims in this country, the United Kingdom, they don't respect fundamental British values, and that something needs to be done about this. And he cited, as an example, the amount of Muslims who supported the proscribed terrorist organization in the UK, Hamas.
So here, this is the poll, the study that they're talking about. 46% of UK Muslims support Hamas. Be careful. He also says support Hamas. Be mindful of the wording here. Support Hamas. It does not talking about whether they consider Hamas to be a terrorist organization or not. It's talking about them supporting Hamas. 46%. That's an insane number. There is no other group of people that have this much support for a group like Hamas that is 46% support. Like, show me another community that has even close, even remotely close, even 10% support for a group as violent as and barbaric as Hamas. So remember, he's going to switch the goalpost. He's going from supporting Hamas to recognizing it as a terrorist group, because when it comes to terrorists, what you define as a terrorist group, there is some technical disagreements. Sometimes people think that if you say some group is not terrorist, you're saying they're good, but it's actually some technical legal jargon that is about whether a state, for example, is a group that is now a state, because it's a state cannot, even if it's doing the most atrocious, the violent acts of barbaric acts of human rights violations or mass genocide, rape, whatever they do, you're not endorsing them by saying that they're not a terrorist group, because technically by the definition of terrorist, there are different definitions. There's no standard definition of a terrorist group. By certain definitions of terrorist group, if you are a state, it doesn't matter how evil you are, you're no longer a terrorist group. Right? So some people suggest that, okay, Hamas is evil and they're doing violent act, but technically by the definition, because they have been elected as a state, we don't recognize them as a terrorist group, but recognize them as evil, but not a terrorist group, right? So just remember that what we care about is not these legal mumbo jumbo of whether they are a terrorist group or not. What we care about is that 46% of UK Muslims are supporting this group. That's what we care about. But look how he switches the goalpost. So let's go back to him.
Now, the first question is, what are fundamental British values? Fundamental British values are 5 in number. They are the rule of law, tolerance, democracy, individual liberty, and respect. These are the 5, box.
Well, I had written this before myself. I would say UK values are basically Enlightenment values, and I had the list of Enlightenment values myself in Google Doc a long time ago. These are the things I've written. Like, he has 5, I have more than 5, but we go with his 5. But separations of powers, like when the thing that came out of Montesquieu, and then we have secularism, we have representative democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of trade, respect for fundamental human rights, property rights, respect for the scientific method, freedom of assembly, respect for rule of law, civic nationalism, individual liberty, and equality under the law. That's the bigger list that I have, but we could go with his 5. His 5 is not complete, but sure, whatever.
Standard, if you like, British values that you have in national curricula all around the country and that are taught to students in this country. So if we ask the question, is it the case that there is something inherent about the religion of Islam or about the Muslim communities, or is there sociological evidence to suggest that those 5 aspects are in all respects rejected by the Muslim community? I would say that's actually an inaccurate statement. Let's take the first thing, democracy, for example. Democracy, by the vast majority of traditionalist Orthodox Muslim commentators and scholars, is considered to be acceptable if used instrumentally. Of course, it's not seen as an objective truth in and of itself. I mean, Plato himself had issues with democracy, and there's philosophers, even in the Western tradition, that had issues with democracy as a system.
Yeah, Plato was wrong about Plato was the first known political philosopher. I mean, technically, everything that political philosophy is doing ever since Plato was a footnote to his Republic, right? But again, that was the first attempt. Obviously, the guy got many things wrong. We don't go to Plato for when we say Western tradition. When we say this is why I say Enlightenment values or Enlightenment values in Western countries rather than Western values. We don't every single political theorist in the West is not what we endorse. We endorse only Enlightenment values. If we want to endorse everything that came out of the West, then we would technically have to support Marxism that came out of Germany, and also Nazism that also came out of Germany. Obviously, we don't support Western values. We support Enlightenment values that came out of the West. We don't support every single Western values. Why are you? This is whataboutism. Well, Islam is against democracy. Well, Plato was also against democracy. Well, screw Plato. Like, who said that because we're supporting Enlightenment values, we support every single theory that came out of the West? That is insane. Also, I will respond to every single one of these points with Mohammed Hijab himself and Quranic verses and hadith. I just want to get through this so let's remember this. We're talking about democracy. I will show you how Islam is anti-democracy. Okay, so we will get back to every single one of these points.
As an objective truth or as a pragmatic usage. So democracy, it's not actually correct to say that, well, Muslims reject democracy and all the results of representative democratic processes. So I don't think we can put that aside for now. Second thing you could say is
also, as liberals, we don't believe in absolute democracy, right? And we don't believe in direct democracy, right? So the opposite of direct democracy, on the other side of direct democracy, is representative democracy. So we believe in representative democracy, not direct democracy. And we don't believe in absolute democracy. We believe in limited democracy. We believe in liberal democracy. Liberal democracy is a limited democracy, which democracy, the rule of the majority, is limited by certain, by the Constitution or anything that acts like the Constitution, which has certain limitation on what the majority can do. namely, for example, basic human rights limits what the majority can do. So we don't believe, as liberals, we don't believe in absolute democracy. We believe in limited. But again, limited by what? That's very important, because republics are limited democracies, but some republics are limited in the wrong way. Some republics are liberal democracies, so they limit democracy based on liberal values.
Respect. There's nothing in the religion of Islam which indicates that respect is to be forgotten or is not to be.
Okay, so remember, we said first, number one, let's write these down. Democracy, we will get back to this. We will see what Islam thinks of democracy, because he says these are UK values. So if Islam is anti-democracy, according to the list of the values that we have for UK, if Islam is anti-democracy, Islam would be in contradiction with UK values.
Upheld, in fact. And this is a very subjective term. What do we mean by respect? But if you're asking the question about Islam and Muslim people in particular, there's nothing there to suggest that. Number three, if you talk about tolerance, well, I mean, there are many verses in the Quran which state quite explicitly and quite candidly that people can live in whatever or using whatever system they want to use for their life.
So if respect means tolerance, let's see what Islam has to say about tolerance. We will get to this. He says, like, Islam lets you live whatever way you want to live. Okay, we'll get to that.
Worldview they want to use. For example, lakum dinukum waliya din in chapter 109 of the Quran.
So lakum dinakum waliya din. Okay, so that means to each their own religion. This is a Quranic verse. And when it says the Quranic verse says to each their own religion, a lot of Muslims try to say, look, Islam is tolerant and everybody could have their own religion. So remember, lakum dinakum waliya din. We will get back to this. Okay, there's two verses that Muslims use to try to when they want to act like Islam is tolerant. One of them is this lakum dinakum waliya din, and the other one is la ikraha fid din. So we'll get to both of those verses, and we will give you the context.
You have your religion, we have ours. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Whoever wants to can believe, and whoever wants to can disbelieve. Or it's mentioned in chapter 2, verse 256, that لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فما يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى. That there is no compulsion.
So he's also saying he also said la ikraha fi din. So lakum dinakum waliya din means to each their own religion. We'll get to that. The second one, la ikraha fi din, means there's no compulsion in religion. We will cover both of these. We will get to both of these.
In religion. This is Islam. Islam does in fact state that.
The first value was democracy. He says, like, well, other Western traditions also don't completely believe in democracy. He was saying democracy is a tool that could be used. It's not like inherently good. And we responded to that, but we will also show Quranic verses and hadiths. Then the second one was respect, and he translated respect as tolerance, and he brought these two verses to show that Islam is tolerance. So now we're going to go to liberty.
We're not meant to convert people forcibly in this way. So if we're asking,
we're not meant to convert people forcibly. We will get to force as well.
Does Islam practice tolerance? Yes. You'll say, of course, some people say, well, you guys don't actually have tolerance towards the LGBT community or this community or that community. Well, in the British context, or in the context of the Western world, there's no scholar or reputable scholar across the world in Islam that says that there shouldn't be, or there should be some kind of intolerance practiced against members of communities which we disagree with the practices of. For example,
wow, there should be no intolerance against the people who disagree with us in the community. We'll see about that. I have everything ready for you.
LGBTQ communities, etc. So I don't think there's enough evidence to suggest that on a sociological level, on a classical Islamic level, that tolerance is not upheld in Islam and or by Muslims in the United Kingdom or anywhere else in the West. What about individual liberty? Now, this is connected, obviously. Liberalism with a small L as an ideology, as something I've spoken about at length, is not something which is compatible with Islam in the broad sense. But individual liberty, if we're talking about people to choose whatever they want in the Western context, Once again, there's no scholar worth his salt or her salt that would say that such a thing is, we should rebel against it in the Western context. So really and truly here, and rule of law, of course, rule of law, scholars are very explicit at the fact that you should obey the law of the land so long as it does not contradict Islamic law if you're living. So you could.
Yeah, well, so you should obey the law of the land, so as long as it doesn't contradict Islamic law. So basically, do not obey the law of the land, because Enlightenment values do contradict Islamic law.